Welcome back, guys. So in this video we'll be learning about the box model, which is a CSS core concept. So let's get started. So let's look at what CSS box model means by definition. It's a fundamental concept for the composition of HTML web pages. Everything in CSS has a box around it, and understanding these boxes is key to being able to create more complex layouts with CSS or to align items with other items. I know these definitions are a bit difficult to understand, but I'll get to the practical examples so that we get to understand them much easier. But before that, let's look at the types of boxes. Most all HTML elements can be grouped under two types of boxes, which is the block level elements or the block boxes and the inline elements or the inline boxes. Some of the examples of the block boxes are p tag, div, h1 to h6, ul, ol, which is the ordered list and the unordered list, and the li tags. And the examples for the inline boxes are span, b tag, I tag, strong, em tag, q tag, and the a tag. Let's take a look at an example to see how the inline and the block elements behave on the web page. Okay guys, so here is a simple web page on your left hand side. So this is the web page, then this is the HTML page, and on top is the CSS page over here. So this is a simple web page that's displaying only the p tag, which I've specified inside the HTML page. So that's what's displaying the I am a p tag. Okay, so let's style this so that you could see this clearly. Let's type p. So if you don't know how to use the selectors, you could check out the video I'll link on top of this video, so you could check out how to select or use the selectors. So with this, I'll just give it a background of green. So giving it a background of color of green, and I'll give it a color of white. So the text color is going to be white. Okay. So one of the properties of the p tag, which is a block level element or a block box, is that it stretches out the whole width of the browser. So just as you are seeing here, it stretches from one end to the other, right? So let me just place in an inline element and let's see. I am a span tag. Okay, so I've now placed in a span tag inside, and let's see what we get. That's it here. I am a span tag. So let's start this as well. So the span is an inline element, so this should be a bit different from the p tag, which is a block level element. So let's see how different it will be. So let me just copy these properties, and I'll make this, instead of green, I'll make it purple, right? So let me save this. So for the span tag, it doesn't stretch all the way across the entire width of the browser. It's only at one side, or the length is the length of its content. And what's the content? The content is whatever I've written inside it. So if you look down here, I am a span tag. That's the content of the span tag. So the length of the inline element is as long as its content. Unlike the block level element, it doesn't span all across the whole width of the web page. So that's one difference between the block level element and the inline element. Now let's look at another difference. So let me bring here in the HTML file another block level element right under the p tag. So if I copy this and place this here, what is going to happen is that the p tag, instead of being in line with the other p tag, is going to come down. So this is what it's going to do. The first p tag, okay, let me make this 1, and then you make this 2 down here. 1, 2, and 1. Okay, so the 2 comes below the 1, and this is another property of the block level element. So if you place 2 block level elements beside each other, or in this case below each other, or one being below the other, it's not going to continue in one line, but it's going to, the next block level element is going to break onto another new line, just as the 2 here is doing. The 2 has broken onto a new line. But let's try this with the span element. The same thing. So mind you, it doesn't matter whether you do it like this. I could just delete this and place it right beside it, right? If you can see it. Right now I've placed this right beside it and I save. It still gives us the same thing. Yeah, so it really matter whether you place the block element beside it like this on the HTML page, or you bring it down. It still give you the same result. So it will break down onto the next line, right? Okay, so for the span tag you get something different. For the inline elements you are going to get something different. So let's name this 1 for the span tag, and I'm going to bring a second one below. So let's see how inline elements behave when they are next to each other. So if I refresh, we are going to get another inline element, not breaking onto the next line, but rather coming beside it. So let me copy this and paste again. So this is going to be 3 and 4. So 3 and 4. Right? So let's see. Okay, right now what you see is it's breaking onto a new line, but this is because it's not able to, it's not having enough space here. It's not having enough space on the web page to display it side by side. That's the only time when the inline element breaks onto a new line. But let's see if I expand this. If I expand it like this, right? Let me expand it. So once I expand, there is enough space, so it's going to flow right beside it. So 1, 2 is flowing beside the 1, and 3, and so forth, so on. Yeah, so that's another difference between the inline and the block. For the block, it breaks onto a new line. For the inline, it continues until there is no enough space before it breaks onto a new line. Cool. Okay, so let's look at another property or another difference. So one difference is that normally the inline elements are placed inside block elements, and the block elements are normally on their own. So for the p tag here, the 2 p tags here on their own, they are just there. But let's say I just remove this span tags, I could place the span tags inside the block elements, right? So I could just write span, and I could close it. And I could write something inside. Okay, so now we get this over here with the span tag inside the p tag. Okay, so let me show another property of the block level element. Sorry. So for the block level element, let me just save this. See. So I'll remove the p tag here and bring a span tag to replace it. So span. Span tag. Right. Okay, so now let me refresh. Now we have the block level elements, which is the p tag, and the inline elements, which is the span tag. Okay, so I would like to show you one difference or one property that separates these two tags. So with the block level elements, the height and width properties are respected. So what does this mean? So let's say on the p tag, you give it a height, right? You give it a height of 100 or 100 pixels, then a width, of also maybe 300 pixels, right? So this means that the height 100 pixel means it's going to give this block level box a height of 100 pixels. Then the width also is going to give it a width of 300 pixels. So let's see what we get. Okay, so the reason why it's not spanning across the entire width is because it's giving it a width of just 300 pixels, right? And the height is this because this is equal to 100 pixels. But let's see this in the inline elements, which is the span tag. Let's see how this one works inside the span tag. So let me just copy these two and paste here, and save and refresh. For the inline elements, the height and width properties are not respected like the block level elements. So specifying the height and width on an inline element will not work, right? It will not work. So with specifying height and width on an inline element is useless, so we could just remove this and still get the same thing even if I refresh. Okay, so let's look at another property. Okay, so for another property is, before that let me just take out this, the height and width, so that we get back our original p tag, how it looks how it was looking in the beginning. So we are going to give it a property called padding, right? So padding is the space between the content and the edge or the border of the box, right? So if I decide to increase the padding, it's going to give it more space between the very edge and the content of the box. So let's see this. So with the padding, I can specify maybe padding top, right? So that will be the top of it, to give a padding to the top of this text. So let's see how this works. So if I give it 100 pixels, it's going to give a space of 100 pixels on top, right? Same applies for padding left. So on the left side here, it's going to give it a space of whatever I specify over here inside the styles. So I could just make this 50 pixels, and we could refresh. Now it has given a space or padding of 50 pixels from the content to the border or the edge, right? So now let's see if this works inside our inline element. So let me just copy from the second one, that is the left, padding left, and save. Okay, so it's working for the padding left. Let me try padding right as well. So padding right. Also, let me just make this 100 pixels. Let me refresh. This is also working. But let's check for the top. This is where the difference comes in. So if I specify for top and also padding bottom, maybe another 100 pixels. So for this code, if I save it, so it has applied and it has given a padding of 100 on top and 100 below. But there's a problem here. It's overlapping our block elements on top. So this is one difference between the block and the inline element. So let's say if this was a block element, right, you would rather push away this and this other block element instead of overlapping it. So let me change this to a p tag, right, with a class. I'll give it a class of fake span. So it's a p tag with a class of fake span. So I have to just specify this here, then save and refresh. Okay, I need to save the HTML as well. So okay, so this is the same style applying to the p tag, but as you can see, it doesn't overlap over the block element, but it has pushed away from the other block element. So it's respecting the presence of the other element on top, or even if it's below, it respects the presence of elements both top and below. But for the inline element, it only respects your position or the position of other elements if they are beside it, right? So let's check this as well. So let's go back to making this a span and remove this class. Okay, so now this will affect the span tag. Okay, so as you can see, it doesn't respect the block level element's position over here. So since it doesn't respect it, it overlaps it. So if you've not done a lot of CSS coding, this might be a bit confusing, but once you start getting into CSS, you come across these errors, and once you remember some of the things that are being said here, you remember that the inline element does not respect the position of other elements that comes on top and below it. But what if it comes beside it? Does it push it away? So let's see. So let me just copy this and paste. Let me reduce the size of the top to maybe 50, the right to 50, let me make it all 50, right? And now I've put a span tag beside it. So you might think it's going to, okay, let me reduce this a bit more, 20 and 20, right? So Right now the padding left is 20 pixels, the padding right is also 20 pixels, and there is a span tag right beside it, so it's supposed to overlap. You might think it's going to overlap the span tag beside it, but like I said, the inline element respects the position or the element that comes beside it, but not on top or below. So if it comes beside it, it's going to push it away. So that's a way of showing respect to the other elements that comes beside it. So let's see. Let me just refresh this. Okay, so let me put another p tag below. So as you can see, it overlaps the elements above or below it, but it doesn't overlap the element that comes beside it, right? It doesn't overlap it because it comes beside it. Okay, so that's another difference between the inline and the block elements. Okay, now let's look at how elements are structured in CSS. The basic structure of the elements can be seen in the diagram showing on the screen. Outside the content of the elements is the padding, which is surrounded by the border. Then there is a margin which spaces out the elements and its surroundings. Let's see this with an example. Okay, so in this example, we are going to still use the p tag, but this time around the p tag is inside a div tag. So the div tag is also a block level element, but normally both other block level elements and inline elements go inside it. Okay, so with this, let me explain the structure of an element in CSS. So let me start by specifying a padding. So the padding is something that we've seen already in the previous video that I did right now. So this is one way of writing the padding. I could just write maybe padding 50. Okay, so with this, what would I get? So if I specify padding of just 50, you space out the elements by giving a padding of 50 on top, 50 below, 50 to the left, and 50 to the right. So to the right, the 50 might end somewhere here, but since it's a block level element, it stretches out to the other sides, right? Okay, so in order to prevent this, let me specify a height and width. So I'll give it a height of 20 pixels and a width of 20 pixels, right? Okay, so 20 pixels for the width is a bit too small, so let me increase it a bit. A bit more. Okay, so I think this is fine. So here is our content, and it is surrounded by the padding. So the space between the content and the border is the padding. But you might ask, where is the border? So let me add a border right now so that you can see what we are talking about. So to add a border, you use this property, border. Then, okay, so first of all, let's give the border a color. So border color is going to be maybe yellow. So I'll make this yellow. Then I'll have to give the thickness. So for the thickness, I'll specify the border width. Then I'll make this equal to 20 pixels. Then I could also specify the border style. Then I'll make this solid. So for these values, you could specify other values for it, but for this example I'll just stick to the ones I'm using right now, just to demonstrate how the structure of the element in CSS is. So let me just save it and see what we get. Okay, so right now we have a clearer view of what we have here as our border. So this is a very thick border around our box, and this is 20 pixels thick. So the border comes right after the padding, and the padding is the space between the content of the element and the border. I hope this is not confusing. So here is our padding, all this space in green. The text is our content, and the border is around the padding. And there's one last thing, which is the margin, right? So with the margin, it's also another space that comes outside of the border. So let's specify the margin and see how this works. Okay, so we could, just like the padding right here, we could specify the margin simply by just typing margin, right? And we could also make it 50. So with the margin, it's an empty space, so we can't color it or give it any other looks. We could just specify the thickness of the margin or the amount of space you want to give as margin, and it's an empty space, so you can't see how the margin looks. It's just an empty space. So if I save it, it pushes away 50 pixels from its original position. So to see this in effect, I would like to style the div that we have in here so that we can actually see the margin. So for now, to this div, this p tag is its content, alright, and the p tag is pushing away on the div tag. But right now we are not able to see anything for the div tag. Though we can't see anything, the div tag is still there. So let's give the div tag a color so that we get to see what we are trying to style here. So div, let's give the div a background color. Of red. And let's see what we get. Okay. So the div is taking the space of, the div is surrounding the box over here. And it has pushed away 50 pixels because we specified 50 pixels over here. It has pushed away another 50 pixels on your right, but since it's a block level element, it is stretching out to the entire width of the container of the page, right? Then for the bottom and the top, is stuck on the border of the box. So let's see how to let the margin be specified for the top and the bottom. Okay, so now I'd like to mess a bit with the default box model of the div we have here. That is the red box we have here. So for the div, we all know that it's a block level element, but we could change this easily in CSS. So we could make this, we could specify the display. So for the display, it can take values such as block, but it's already blocked, so it wouldn't make sense to make this block again. And we could also make the block elements an inline element, right? But for this example, we want to make it an inline block. So the inline block is an element which is halfway between the block and an inline element. So it takes some of the properties of block elements and also some of the properties of inline elements. Since we really want to go to advanced on this display type, we just leave it at the inline block. Save it and see what we get. Okay, so right now we have our box which has been pushed away by 50 pixels on top, on the left, on the right, the bottom. Then we can clearly see the border of our p tag, the padding, which is the space between the content and the element, the content of the element and the border, and we have the content. So every single element has this box model, so you should be mindful of how this box model is used and can be manipulated alongside the other elements is close by. And this brings us to the end of this video. And in the next video, you look at another CSS core concept, which is the cascade, specificity, and inheritance.